The Steel Traveler of Urth by Saul L. Roberts. For my grandmother, whom I never got to say goodbye to. Chapter 1. The small border town of Rebka lay stretched out beneath a sun that never set. Buildings constructed of dirt appeared to have exploded out from the ground, as if the earth itself found their presence distasteful and wanted as little contact with them as possible. Entering the town, Jason felt dwarfed by the tall, domed, and octagonal houses whose tops leaned uncomfortably far from their bases. His back was burdened by a large backpack, supported only by the power armor he wore beneath his desert-colored robes. Making his way toward the town's only tavern, passing through the empty streets, he felt multi-lensed eyes peeking through the holes that served as the building's windows. Occasionally, a shadow flashed briefly behind tattered curtains, making him glance up nervously. When he looked, there was nothing there but the relentless sun beating down upon his masked face. Reaching the tavern, he saw what looked like a decaying biped hanging precariously out from the windows. Across its chest hung a sign that read,
"No humans allowed. Mutants must have ID."
He self-consciously touched the metallic mask upon his face, but then, catching himself, he made a quick check from left to right to make sure no one had seen his slip before bending low to crawl through the tavern's only opening. The doorway had been designed for creatures with a greater degree of flexibility, and at least 2 more appendages than he had. Yet, with a grunt and a twist, he managed to muscle his way toward the door, where, bringing the 5 gauntleted fingers of his hand together to form 3 digits, Jason stuck them through the triangular set of holes in the door and pulled it open. Crawling through the doorway, he entered a cooled inner chamber where the stench of unwashed, insectival bodies hid him even through the air filter of his mask. A quick glance at the other tavern occupants confirmed he was the only biped in the room. All manner of creatures from the frontier lands were scattered about, most of them from Coloptria or Orthoptria, the 2 lands closest to Rebka. At his entrance, countless large, multi-lensed eyes turned from whatever business they had been conducting to stare directly at him. Seeing his oversized shoulders, clawed metal hands, and metallic face, most then promptly returned to their business, his entrance already forgotten. The 2 inebriated Bladodonians in the far corner, however, were the exception. Taking one last swig of their drinks, they grinned benevolently at each other, before kicking their stools aside as they stood and approached Jason. Anticipating trouble, Jason flipped the dial of his power armor to maximum. Even with the extra bonus in height that the armor offered him, the 2 Bladodonians stood a full meter taller. With 6 powerful arms apiece and a thick carapace of an exoskeleton shrouding their red skin, they sauntered up with weapons in plain view.
"What are you doing here, freak?"
The one on the left spoke in the Bladodonian clattering tongue. The Bladodonian's exoskeleton was battered and scratched all over, and at some point it looked as if someone had taken a vibroblade to his left antenna because it was shorter than his right.
"Yeah. Didn't you see the sign out front?"
He laid his bottom right hand on his energy pistol.
The sign said no humans.
Jason's voice cooler crackled to life, making his words sound gruff and mechanical with static.
Do I look human?
"You look like undead droppings to me."
We're all entitled to our opinion.
He met the Bladodonian's black lenses with his own.
"Is that a fact?"
With his peripheral vision, Jason saw hands around the room move toward their weapons. Several dozen multi-lensed eyes watched with cold wariness as to what would happen next.
Yes.
Jason said coldly.
For instance, in my opinion, you both look like a couple of gutter-waste shivane fests.
He used a term in their own language that implied both their poor hygiene and choice in sexuality.
But that would just be my opinion, wouldn't it?
The 2 Bladodonians were so shocked to hear their own tongue, they didn't realize at first that they'd been insulted. Not wanting to give them time to react, Jason pounced. His metallic clawed hand balled into a fist, and he punched the Bladidonian to his right deep in the midsection. Then, grabbing the one on his left by the carapace, he leaped up to slam his metallic face into the sectiband. It went limp in his metallic claws, and its dead weight nearly pulled Jason off his feet when he hit the ground. The Bladidonian to his right doubled over stunned, then turned a furiously stiff antenna in Jason's direction before making for his guns. Jason felt the ancient gears of his power armor strain under the weight of the Bladidonian in his claws. With a great heave, he tossed the limp sectip over his head and at his companion. The two collided, the sound of their carapaces cracking making a few of the tavern customers wince. Both Bladidonians flew backwards into a far table, which happened to be full of similarly intoxicated Authoptrians. Cursing violently over their spilled drinks and ruined Mathron leaves, the Authoptrians reached down to pick up the two Bladidonians before proceeding to beat the holy hell out of them while they were still only semi-unconscious. As though nothing had happened, Jason turned and walked cautiously over to the bar in the center of the room. He was secretly glad both Bladidonians had been drunk, or else their quick reflexes and renowned regenerative abilities would likely have undone him. An Authoptrian, who was somewhat more portly than the others, stood behind the counter. His multiple hands were busy serving drinks and washing cups. Like most of his kind, the barkeep stood at around 3 meters, with long insect features. The majority of his body mass and organs were located within his abdomen. The two large blue-stained wings hung limply from his shoulders and extended past his thorax. Each appendage ended in 3 long, bony fingers, with the exception of his 2 predominant hands, which each had a 4th, larger finger that could only be described of as a thumb. The Authoptrian's head was small compared to the rest of his body. He had a hairless skull with 2 large antennae, and 2 even larger eyes set almost right on top. His insect eyes locked onto Jason apprehensively, his 2 bluish-green antennae shivering fiercely as Jason sauntered up to the bar. Putting down all the cups he was washing, the bartender put all 4 hands defensively on top of the bar and gave Jason a hard stare.
What are you doing in here?
He spoke in his native tongue, his old beat-up wings fluttering slightly.
I need a room.
The voice coder in Jason's mask added the necessary high-pitched sounds to his voice as he spoke, which allowed him to answer the barkeep in his native tongue.
You got papers, mutant?
The barkeep leaned forward suspiciously. Reaching into the ragged robes covering his armor, Jason pulled out a small, green glowing stone. Placing it very slowly on the countertop between them, he watched the barkeep's eyes widen at the sight of it as they twitched back and forth between him and the stone.
I want a room, a meal, and a woman, presuming that you have any here that are close to my species.
Jason growled tiredly. He tapped the steel-clawed hand on the counter lightly, but impatiently.
Your papers aren't current,
The barkeep said after a moment's thought.
but I can understand how a man such as you yourself might let that slip.
He picked up the green stone and tucked it out of sight. Glancing quickly around the room, he leaned in closer to whisper,
Leave through the front door, and I'll have someone let you in through the back. If I were you, though, I'd stay out of the common room. I'll make sure someone takes care of your meals and drinks.
He gave Jason a wide-mouthed smile of his mandibles.
But I'm afraid I can't help you with a woman. There aren't too many females your kind around here.
Jason was deeply disappointed, but he'd expected it.
That'll get you at least 3 rounds, but no more. Understand?
The barkeep said, nodding towards where he'd hidden the stone.
I don't care if you have 100 of those stones under your robes. Your staying here ain't good for my business. And it don't take long for word to get around that I got a humanoid staying under my roof.
Jason nodded again.
I don't plan on causing anyone any trouble.
He said, stepping back from the bar.
And 3 rounds is all I'll need.
Good.
The barkeep said softly. Then, in a very loud voice, so that everyone in the room could hear, he yelled,
Now get out!
Jason smiled within his metallic mask as he felt every multi-lensed eye in the bar turn to look at him. All were curious to see what he would do. He noticed one particular pair of eyes as he turned to exit. They belonged to a Caloptrian seated in the far corner of the bar, his four-fingered hand resting upon the head of a Felis catus, a sentient quintuplet from the inner lands that most closely resembled a panther with ape-like clawed hands and two long golden horns protruding from its head. Caloptrians were shaped like giant desert beetles. Their species were renowned for their tough shells, ruthless fighting, and high intelligence. For nearly 1,000 cycles they had dominated the art of technomancy, the ability to mix magic and science into one flowing force. It was a force Jason had no talent for and was quite helpless against. All his mechanical toys were nothing but paperweights against the will of a technomancer with even the slightest skill. The look he received from the Caloptrian made him ill at ease. For what he was sure was the 100th time he questioned the intelligence of entering this town. There are plenty of other human-friendly villages about, but this was where he was supposed to meet his employer. To either side of the black-shelled beetle sat 4 Orthoprians and another Caloptrian, all armed to the teeth, but currently paying him only the slightest bit of attention. Jason noticed, as he passed, the Felis catus at the Caloptrian's feet wore the standard golden choker of a personal slave. A long, glittering chain ran from the choker to the technomancer's wrists. The Felis catus looked at him with an expression that matched its master's, penetrating. It was as though they saw right through Jason's robes, power armor, and mask, right to the soft pink flesh beneath. He needed to leave, or no amount of payoff would convince the barkeep to let him stay. Jason hurried past the technomancer and his pet and headed for the door. He felt the two of them staring at him as he left. The feeling did not sit well.
Yeah.
He whispered as he struggled out the door.
I doubt I'll be staying any longer than the night.